Around the world, artists are using digital technology to speak their mind. These artists show us that a physical studio is not needed, using the virtual world to question the reality we live in. As part of POWERPLAY, an exhibition championing the African digital art scene, we will explore how these artists create. These are some of their desktops.
Hi, I'm Isaac. I'm a visual artist from Nairobi, Kenya, living in London. I do work that mostly centers on stuff to do with surveillance, privacy, things of that nature relating to the global south and how we interact with the internet and how technology kind of shapes our world and kind of creates a new geopolitics. So most of these ideas take the form of videos, mostly 3D kind of stuff, and also a lot of performances that are recorded and broadcasted in with interesting visuals. I also work with a lot of lectures. I do a lot of writing, and it all pertains in the kind of themes I work on. And for photography, which I haven't done in like 2 years, but that also is part of my practice. I think accessibility was always a thing that was making me a bit punk in terms of digital art, because I come from Kenya, which is not the most, at the time, wasn't the most connected place in terms of just the internet access, in terms of just any kind of communities you want to build around digital art. So I was always well, I need to also show that the internet is not democratic in that nature. When net art started popping up and all these kinds of more digital art came up, curators and art critics and even artists were all yeah, this is it. This is the great equalizer. All of us can make this, but actually there's so many things that come in the way of you actually getting these things. I think about how many people actually don't even have a home computer. A lot of people browse the internet on their phones as their primary kind of source. The internet is no longer a free-for-all. There's only really 3 websites that we use basically, and at different times. It would be a lie to say that new technology is accessible. I think it is accessible to certain demographics. There's unspoken rules about how you should behave in public and with art that you don't have to abide by when you're just looking at it on a screen. I think that's a positive thing that people prefer. It also feeds into how the BLM stuff is being talked about now, and suddenly galleries that were a majority Black art are suddenly getting a lot of press, and they're oh, now we're getting attention. Because back in the day, it basically had to be the gatekeepers who dictate what culture is, and now actually the democratization of what culture is making the big ups kind of panic and do really haphazard, heavy-handed, kind of protections of what they think is relevant. Yeah, what actual things are you doing instead of just hogging a moment? So this is my desktop. I was just in the middle of watching How to Survive a Plague, the David France documentary about the AIDS crisis. Highly recommend it. Really great stuff. Really amazing strategies to do with protest, which is very current. So my desktop is a bit of a mess. A lot of it is ideas that I'm thinking about, but not fully developed. Here's a picture of the guy who founded PayPal. He's a very odd character, and I'm really interested in kind of what he does right now, which is he's always online on role-playing games. That's all he does now because he's semi-retired. This is an image of an exhibition I had, my first ever exhibition. I had a MacBook in the middle of a gallery, and I let people take photos of themselves on the photo booth, and they were all hang-ups every day. So there's around 300 of them. And I need to figure out where to put these photos. So that's why it's on my desktop, to remind myself that I need to do this eventually. Miscellaneous images and memes. This is a background to Uncut Gems that I use as a Zoom background. Memes again. Another meme. Yeah, I think it's just a lot of memes that should have gone somewhere else. This is a folder of images that I've been collecting of kind of Facebook and Instagrams of a lot of people who live in the global south. So those are countries that are outside of the West, and the kind of images that are circulating and I'm trying to find commonality, which I don't think there is an aesthetic commonality, but there is an aesthetic principle, which is kind of campy and overly done Photoshop work, which is and also the kind of merging of Western consumerism to do with here's Iron Man, here's Naruto, here's everything all together at once. And that's when you find a backpack which has Mulan and Barbie on it at the same time. And I think it has a lot to do with globalization and the kind of leaking of excessive Western culture into like the global South. And that's when you find stuff like this. And yeah, I love thinking about this. And every time I find an image, that's when I put it in this folder. This is my Hotep collection. It's a visual language that's hard to describe, but it's basically really kind of sexist kind of memes that circulate around like heterosexual, like black culture on the internet. And it has a lot to do with embracing your naturalness or whatever, but then it just comes off really hackneyed and bad. And it's a lot of like really bad politics, essentially. Oh, I love this. Yeah, there's a lot of really stupid memes that haven't found a place to sit yet. This is my favorite meme ever. So this is the hard drive that I use for everything. This is my workstation. So I think my largest archive stuff is for CBT, which is a project called Coding Braiding Transmissions, which is a project I do with Tamar Clark. This is a GoPro footage of what the exhibition looks like from the models. It's essentially it's 3 models essentially braiding each other's hair in an exhibition with GoPro cameras strapped to their heads. The GoPro cameras are basically looking at their hand movements and picking them up and using a code that we made with a programmer to translate that into language. So they're essentially talking to each other as they're braiding each other's hair as a way of kind of escaping like surveillance networks. This is what the code looks like. This is a recording from the Tate Modern, and it looks like mumbo jumbo. There's actually a lot of basically language of the patterns of people braiding hair. So you can see left hand, right hand. And I actually made videos of what the hands look like in 3D if we mapped them onto like a software that we made through the Xbox Connect, corrupted it into making these sort of strange visuals of like what hands look like, because the Connect only ever picks up hands and doesn't pick up anything else. Languages of surveillance networks, essentially hands of like what you use in order to just like do anything. And it was kind of creepy how like disembodied hands kind of look like, and the kind of what you can assume the hands are doing. And so it's up to the viewer to kind of tell what's going on. This is another version through another software that we use that was trying to pick up hand motion. It was essentially, we got it to figure out what was the left hand and what was the right hand. So right equals green, left equals blue. We were wondering if it could tell it was left and right if we moved a lot of things, if we moved it from right to left and like we crossed it. Because we're essentially playing around with surveillance software, right? So we wanted to see like, okay, can surveillance software adapt and know what something is, what a body part is? Does it infrared get weirder if someone gets closer? There's like all these kind of factors that have to do with how malleable and how kind of stupid surveillance software actually really is if you really test it a lot. We wanted to see if that will make us kind of fear them less. If I see a surveillance camera, would I automatically think like, oh, well, it's imprinted me, I want some database? Or would I actually be like, well, these things are actually kind of stupid and like it'll take them forever to like figure out what you're doing. This is actually another project that has not seen the light of day. These are essentially all different phones and the different IP addresses they were giving off. This was in central London. These are just all the phones that were in my radius. I found that really creepy. I found that very kind of scary that a rudimental kind of software can like figure out how many phones are around me. Like imagine someone trying to hide and then you can just pick up like, oh, well, these are all the IP addresses. This is from the Tate Modern exhibition that we had. This is a model walking into the performance with her GoPro on. We're going to keep building it and seeing what it can become further and further down. We essentially want to make something that can work, like an actual messaging service that you can do by braiding hair. We want to give it out for free. That's essentially like, that's the biggest goal that we have of this entire project. Yeah, I'm always like thinking about what the next thing or what like a remix of the actual thing could look like. That's why I like art, because it's not a complete package. You can just keep adjusting and tweaking each time that you go. And it's not like a musician who finishes an album and then they have to like make a whole different version of the album. And you can just keep adding stuff. I'm never done with a project, but actually no, it's not true. I've actually just like gotten bored of projects and kind of scrapped them. This is one of the ones that I think has so many openings, so many other places I can take it. It's still not even 100% there. We're not even fully done, but we have ambition. I grew up in Nairobi. I grew up between Lavington and Westlands. These are two areas which I'd say are mostly suburbs slash like city center area, but most notably it's very close to Kibera, which is one of the world's biggest slums. Nairobi is probably the most, I guess, the financial center of like East Africa, and you can tell because there's areas that are highly developed, but also it's right next to areas that are extremely deprived. You know, Kenya is one of the countries that has has contracted China to make a lot of roads and a lot of infrastructure, and now we owe them a lot of money. Like I remember going back a year ago and I had to pay so much money for like mangoes, and I was like, oh, it's because we're trying to pay back all the loans that we took out. But that being said, I think Nairobi's a really gorgeous city. I have a love-hate relationship like everyone does with the cities they grew up in. And for a long time I was very nihilistic about it, but now I'm kind of seeing it as a very like an incredible city that's gone through a lot of things over the last few decades. You know, we only got rid of our dictator in like 2004. So the fact that we're still like kind of developing and becoming a really great city is kind of amazing. I don't know why all the images of like touristy giraffes, like there's no giraffes just walking around, but that's how it is. I think because my parents well, I'll say my mom was very much interested in politics. She'd always read the newspaper like every single day and would kind of tell us about it. I think that's what kind of made me have a political consciousness. And also, I think I was also like 12 or 13 when, there's like basically a mini civil war that happened. So everyone was kind of thrust into thinking about politics and where the country was going. I just always was unknowledgeable about Kenya art because I just never knew where to look. And everywhere I looked, stuff that was meant for like international dealers to like sell. And I love that I keep seeing a new pop-up come up every time. Same as like all over East Africa. Like I went to Uganda and there was an exhibition in like a parking lot of a mall. And there's not much art funding in Kenya, which is partly the reason why I'm still like not there right now. And so, I think you kind of have to be multi-purpose. You have to be smart, I think. I came to London and I found like an immediate kind of community going on there. Also just because I happened to be on Tumblr and a lot of people were on Tumblr who just happened to live in London. And that's where I found a lot of people who were really into my style in an ever-changing London. It's a place that I really love because I also just love the Elephant and Castle Shopping Center, which is, I'm currently working with like Latin Elephant organizing groups that are trying to save the Elephant and Castle Shopping Center from population cleansing that's going to happen when they demolish it and build up like luxury flats. In my final year of uni, I made a zine called Diaspora Drama, which you can download in torrent from my website. And it was the start of when I was really interested in like all the Black and brown artists who are more and more interested in digital works and also just humorous in their approach to it. They were not really taking themselves too seriously because the internet is forever nihilistic and you just kind of avoid it. I think all my work basically was about, I don't want to say the word, but like the intersection of art and technology. That's kind of where it all came from, really. I don't know how I found Tumblr, but I just like used it a lot, and I got a lot of friends there that I still know. Peak like internet art. All the aesthetics of like what the internet art is, because it's like weird juxtapositions and just weird play on like stock photos. That's what I was really into. I think I was just always really interested in, I don't want to say shocking, but just off-putting kind of, without delving into like the gore and nasty side of the internet. I was just really into banal kind of creepiness, even though it doesn't appear in my work. It appears in terms of just the vibe, and that's why I'm like interested in like the darknet and things like that nature. I mean, my thought was that I was gonna be a fashion photographer professionally and like a digital artist on the side, but then little did I know neither of them made money. So I had to kind of decide which one lets me express myself more, and it just happens to be digital art. I was commissioned by Arbeit to make precious metals for the exhibition POWERPLAY. And precious metals was kind of an idea I had since like, I want to say 2018. I wanted to do stuff with watches and the internet and like what watches mean online. And my first thought was I want to make a short film about someone trying to sell watches online. But then I never thought about it again until I was approached by Arbite. And I was like, oh, I'm super into watches and I want to see what watches are like on the dark net. So I went on the dark net and a lot of people were selling watches like every day. And like they were all either replicas or the real deal. They kind of like fell off the truck and they were selling them for super cheap. Like this one's like 70 pounds of Michael Kors. So I bought a bunch of them and I took like photos of them and all these things, and I kind of wanted to see what I could do with them. And I ended up kind of making videos that were 3D models of the art, and I made them gray because I was interested in the idea of the gray market, which is kind of where they sit. And the gray market essentially is the midpoint between the black market and the clear market. So like clear market is like Amazon, then the dark market is like, dark web heroin. So, but the mid ground is the gray market. So stuff that fell off the truck, stuff that's sold by vendors outside of like the distribution channels. So there's a lot of people who just live in this weird state of legal and illegal. And that's kind of the same for precious metals in a sense, because they are sold on the clear market. You can go to a shop, you can go to a jeweler and buy diamonds. You can go to the darknet and buy diamonds. And you can also go to the gray market and buy diamonds, because precious metals are essentially things that are always legal and illegal at different times of the year and different times of the day, different times of like history, depending on where you are. I'm hopeful that like a lot of people would relate to this or would know family members or friends who are not in Bulawayo who would be like, oh yeah, this is what my friend ... is going through right now in Europe. Yeah, I was quite happy that the first showing of this piece would actually be with an African gallery. So there's a lot of politics that goes into watches when you don't really think about them. I even found how watches actually, there's a section of like incel YouTube that's all about hypnotizing women with your watch. It's like a metaphor in and of itself, like it's literally straps to your arm as you walk around it every day. Like it's such a weird kind of object. I also kind of do want the experience of you just entering a high street jeweler, because high street jewelers are like also at the midpoint of like luxury and tacky. I'm always working at the midpoint of certain ideas. Okay, on Maya, this is like one of the Rolexes that I bought because I'm not like the best at Maya, but I do know the basics. And I did the thing of just like, let me work each section by section. So like the disc one by one. So these are all individual objects that I just sort of worked with. I'm not making the Rolex logo. Actually, I didn't steal it. Like they made me buy it. So I know a lot of 3D artists, they shape into one humongous file and then they make all the dips and ridges and all these things. But I just was like, I'm going to do the cumbersome thing of making all of these items one by one. So yeah, and then I just like recorded this. And I loved how Preview also just gives you a lot of shading of the actual gray, which is pretty sick. It's a SIM card project, which is like probably my longest running project. It's essentially a SIM card template of photos I've taken of people to like kind of replicate a lot of what the marketing of SIM cards look like. Telecommunication companies across Africa, it's a lot of really generic looking like African citizen, African life. As a sort of critique of like how telecommunication works in Africa, which is basically monopolies. For instance, in Kenya, we have Safaricom, which is our largest provider. Safaricom is owned by Vodafone. For the longest time, they were the only provider, so they could create a monopoly and charge you expensively, and you couldn't really do anything. In Uganda, for the Kampala Art Biennale, I kind of printed them off and actually had the gold and everything there to actually really look a lot like a SIM card. And then I had to kind of cut them up and like shave them like all by hand. And I think I had like 100 of them. Yeah, luckily it was a residency. So I just occupied all my time just like scratching all these off. My biggest goal for this project, if I had the funding, was to actually make an entire cell phone network out of them and add the actual space to have people call each other on these phones.
Honestly, I do want to kind of step a bit back from showing rather than I kind of do want to research more, like take a year or 2 years just mostly researching other practices, or like, because essentially all my work is about like people who like who want to or already live outside of like the conditioned networks that we're in, and I sort of want to just like delve deeper into that. Yeah, I do want to just like continue researching whatever. I mean, all my ideas have kind of come naturally. I never really force them. So if they want to come, they'll come, I guess. And so yeah, that's kind of where my practice is going. I guess don't try to make work that you assume is appealing. I think that's I think anyone can relate to that. Once you figure out that like I actually, the stuff that I was making just to like satisfy like a specific audience was actually my least interesting work, or the work I don't really care about. Like I've thrown a lot of stuff in the trash that was just meant to be appealing to, which is not to say that like just make art for yourself. I think that's kind of self-serving, but I think you always do have an audience, and no matter what you're kind of making, there's always people who would be interested in it. But so just don't think of what's going to appeal to people first before you actually make the work, because it's easy to spot a hollow piece of work.